But let's get started then with this thing on the mini budget, because it's what I've been thinking about quite a lot while I've been away. A feature of going away with the in-laws is you have plenty of time to think about stuff, and a long train journey up to Scotland is quite helpful for this sort of thing. So I've been listening to quite a lot of the kind of coverage of the policy announcement, call it that, or mini budget. And I'm really confused by quite a lot of it, because a lot of it seems to me to not really make any sense. But if you're feeling the same way as me, here's what I'm thinking about it. And you can either take it or leave it, or neither of it, basically. So when I try and make sense of this mini budget thing, I start off by going back about 6 weeks. And 6 weeks ago, it feels like a long time ago now, but Boris Johnson is still Prime Minister, and he has a problem. The problem he has is that energy bills are looking like they're about to go to £3,549 pounds on average per year. And he basically wants people to put up with it. He says you can have 400 quid back, so we'll call it 3150 or so, but your energy bills are gonna go up quite a lot from a sort of 1900 or so amount. Okay, exit Boris Johnson out of the picture. And enter Liz Truss, who wins the election to replace him, the internal election amongst the Conservatives. First thing she thinks is, this is intolerable. We must find a way of bringing down people's energy bills. So we're going to cap them at 2,500 on average. Okay, so that's a thing that we're going to do the previous government wasn't prepared to do. The obvious question becomes, how on earth are we going to pay for this sort of thing? Because subsidising people's energy bills is going to be expensive. It's going to cost us about 60 billion in the 6 months starting, well, now in October. Fair enough. So you have two options if you're a government. You can either tax things to try and raise the money, or you can borrow it, basically. And if you tax it, you need to deal with the idea that you will kind of curb economic growth in your country. And if you borrow it, you have to deal with the question of how the hell you're going to pay it back again. And basically, as I understand it, this budget was the government's way of saying, look, here is the plan. Or at least, here is how we plan to fund that thing, at least. And the government's basically said we're going to borrow it all. So borrowing about 60 billion to fund 6 months worth of stuff, and then we're going to pay it back either by trying to tax people or by growing the economy and paying it back out of that, and we're going to try and grow the economy effectively. So if you want to try and grow your economy, you have two options. You can either produce more goods and sell them to people, or you can develop better services and encourage service industries to kind of come and operate in your country. Goods are difficult here because, well, basically, we don't really manufacture anything in this country anymore because people manufacture it for a lot less in places like China. And it's difficult to see because we have a minimum wage, and I think that's a very good thing for what it's worth, exactly how we're going to work out how to be competitive in a goods industry like that. So we need to try and grow the economy, or the route we've chosen is grow the economy, especially through service industries. So away goes the cap on banker bonuses to try and encourage banks to come to the UK. Away goes the increase in national insurance. Away goes the higher rate of tax. 45% becomes a fixed 40% from everyone upwards. Down goes income tax to try and get the rest of us spending. I'm not affected by higher rate of tax, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. I mean, fairly obviously I'm not. I'm here. I don't even live in my own house. Out goes stamp duty, or at least the lower part of stamp duty. The threshold for that's rising to 250,000. Very interesting to the likes of me trying to buy a house at the moment. Out goes a rise in alcohol tax. Or proposed rise in alcohol tax, and VAT gets waived for overseas visitors to get them to come along and buy stuff. Okay, so that's the broad shape of things. I don't like the look of this budget very much, and a lot of people don't like the look of this budget, but I think my reasons are different to most people's reasons, and I'll tell you why I'm worried about it. It's not because it's trickle-down economics, for what it's worth. Trickle-down economics, as I understand it, is supposed to be the idea that you start off by helping the rich, and then you hope that that somehow helps the poor or the less well-off along the way, basically. So the idea is rich people spend more and more goes into the economy, and then you use that to somehow help the less well-off in society. This to me looks like the opposite of that, for what it's worth. I mean, it starts off with a freeze on energy bills, which helps, well, everybody, but proportionally it helps people who spend more of their income on their energy bills, or we're going to struggle to afford a 3,500 energy bill. So this doesn't look like trickle-down economics, because the usual worry about that is it never trickles down, effectively, and the least well-off never benefit. This starts off with the least well-off benefit, and then try to figure out how the hell we're going to pay for it, one way or another. The reason I don't like this, I also have little sympathy, by the way, with the kind of objection that this is a new era, and we've had the Conservatives in government for the last 12 years. I wouldn't associate this government with the last 12 years any more than I would associate the Labour Party now with the Labour Party of 13 years ago, particularly. So I'm okay with the idea that it's a new post-COVID era as well. Here's why I worry about this budget a lot. It looks to me like a massive risk. And I heard the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, talking about this, and he said it wasn't a risk because he said the alternative was worse. And that might be true or it might not be true, but even if the alternative is worse, that doesn't mean this isn't a risk. We don't say that sticking all your money into Netflix isn't risky because you could have stuck it all into Palantir or something like that. We think that's still risky, just maybe the other is more risky. So interest rates are going up at the moment in the UK, and they are going up fast from what I can see of it. And they're likely to keep going up faster and faster and faster. And that means if your plan is to borrow stuff, your life got an awful lot more difficult. People are finding that who need to reset their mortgages at the moment. The rate they can reset them at is a lot higher than where it was before, and some people who can't afford the rate increases are likely to run into some difficulties. But that's true whether you're a private citizen or whether you're a government. If you're a government, you don't want to be borrowing at higher rates, and the government's plan here is to borrow and borrow and borrow. And this, to me, is where there's a massive, massive risk coming through, and it's why I don't like this budget. It's bold and it's ambitious, and it could absolutely win the day, but it needs to come through on the growth side. That economic growth that this is apparently being used to fund has to come through, and if it doesn't, it looks like an almighty long fall for the UK in economic and probably political financial terms, and this could go for a long old time from what I can see of it, Steve.
It definitely could, yes. So one of the things you really want when you're fighting inflation is a stable currency. It really does help matters to keep the currency quite stable. And as you can see from literally what's happened off the back of this budget is that the pound has collapsed, which for people like Steve and I who are already in some American stocks, that's actually been a pretty useful thing for us. Especially it's kind of for UK investors investing into US stocks, it's kind of hidden some of the losses that the S&P and the Nasdaq have experienced, and that's only why. I was just saying to Steve off air that with FX on my Netflix position, I'm only about 7% away from being green, despite being about 30% off in price. So, I mean, that just shows you the sort of the depth and scale of just how much the FX is affecting. We have a bit of a competition in the Discord about who's got the largest FX, and I think I saw somebody touch over 30% up on FX, which in this a relatively short period of time is absolutely crazy. But there's a few things I've picked up that were quite interesting on the subject. I saw Larry Summers. He came out straight away and said that the tax cuts are utterly irresponsible, and he warned that this was some kind of contagion because the UK is seen as being one of the sort of financial epicenters, at least in Europe. But it was once the world, but at least in Europe was one of the financial epicenters, and I think. The worry is that if the UK can be as irresponsible with their policies, that this might spread outwards and infect other countries as well. I saw Ray Dalio came out and he said that essentially that it smacked of incompetence, which was quite a strong term really for a brand new chancellor to. Being a few days in the job, and he is already being accused of incompetence by Dalio, who he doesn't say words like that too lightly. I mean, he is a doom and gloom merchant, but he would not single out somebody individually like that for criticism. But I also saw today that Mohammed Al-Arian as well. He has come out and said that the Bank of England is essentially still in central bank la land. He was essentially trying to insinuate the same thing that the other two were. That this is not the best move at the moment from the UK government. I did see that the Bank of England have restarted bond buying as well. So essentially, we're in inflation and back. Quantitative easing. They're doing this because they saw some quite serious constraints and financial pressures in our financial markets as well. So, in normal times, if a chancellor had done something in his budget or announced something in his budget that caused the Bank of England to move with the sort of pace that our Bank of England have moved to shore up our financial system, that Chancellor would have offered his resignation by the end of the day and quit in embarrassment. But of course, we are in this current shambolic government. That's the only way I can describe it. And I don't feel like we're going to quite see that happening anytime soon. But Steve, go on. You have some more?
Just some thoughts on what you were kind of offering there for what it's worth. I mean, Charlie Munger says, and I'm sort of reminded of this at the moment, that the politicians are never so bad that you don't live to want to see them back again. So, I mean, it's only 6 weeks ago that we were all staring down a huge energy increase hike, basically. And now I think it's fair to say, fairly objectively, we're not staring down the same hike in energy increases and so on. Would we rather have had it back again? I mean, this is the kind of thing we were discussing with Paul a little bit when Damien was on the show as well. And is it the case that we just kind of need to go... The kind of received wisdom here is that we've got a lot of paying back to do, and we need some higher interest rates, and the currency needs to be strengthened and so on and so forth. And it's going to be a hard road through that, but we might as well start on that road now. And the kind of new administration has said, no, we're going to dig our way a bit further in and then try and grow our way back out of it again. I don't know whether I think this is ridiculous or not. I think time will tell, but I think there's an awful lot of cost to this if it is wrong, because the kind of small c conservative, the i.e. less risky way of doing things would have been to inflict some temporary pain on people, and that's very easy for me to say as someone who is unlikely to reach any level that might meaningfully be called poverty as a result of it. You may well feel differently if you're the kind of person who can afford to heat their house with $2,500 but not with $3,500 as an energy bill, something like that. But it's very much flying in the face of things, isn't it? The IMF has had something to say about it. Moody's has had something to say about it, threatening to downgrade UK debt and so on. But yeah, the Bank of England, this is the real worry from what I see of it. It looks like government policy here and Bank of England policy are kind of fighting each other a bit, right? Because what you want for borrowing is lower interest rates. The trouble is lower interest rates is likely to mean inflation again, because we've just spent the last, 6 months saying, here's inflation, rates are going up to try and fight inflation. Most of the time we've been saying rates have been going up, and it doesn't seem to have been stopping the inflation thing, either here or in the US very much. But it feels like this is kind of... the government feels like they want one last bit of kind of... what they will see as one last bit of inflation. And of course, there is also a worry, I think, of what happens if this administration doesn't get to see it through. So if we start off doing the borrowing bit and then sort of change course part way through on that, this makes me wary of UK things.
Yeah, I suppose one of the other things we could really touch upon as well is the stamp duty freeze is an interesting one to me, because I think anybody who's in a fixed rate mortgage at the moment, they cannot seriously be thinking about wanting to move house. So say you're in a 5 or 10 year fix at the moment, or 7 year or 3 year fix at the moment, and you're thinking, I could do with a bigger house. You're going to be swapping out of a deal which is potentially maybe sub 2%, between 1 and 2%, to a deal that is probably over 6%. So I was talking to my wife about this afterwards, and I thought, who seriously is thinking about moving? Do you know what I mean? I would think everybody is in a rush to just stay put. So this here is for people to buy new homes, and straight away you can sort of see, I guess, where I'm going with this is that I don't think there's going to be, even with the stamp duty cut, I don't think that's enough when we're used to these inflation essentially at like 1 or 2%, and interest rates at sub 1% or 1%, or even negative real rates, I guess. I don't think anybody's in a real rush to go and get a mortgage at 6%. Steve, has it affected your thinking? Are you thinking 6% is okay? Are you thinking 6% now because it'll be 10% next year, or what are you thinking?
I think I wouldn't. No, I'm not thinking that 6% now because it'll be 10% next year. I agree with you. I think there's an awful lot of people who, if they attempted to move, would go from paying $800 to $1,400 or something like that a month, and you'd have to do quite a lot better for it to be worth that. I mean, the way it looks to me, and I'm sort of dealing with this mostly in cash is I'm looking for house prices to come down, basically, as people can't afford to move. And I'm also looking to an unfortunate, or what I consider to be an unfortunate class of people who fixed their mortgage for quite a while ago, fairly intelligently, but their mortgages are now expiring, and now they have two options, which is to either refix or to go on to kind of tracker. But from what I saw of it, about half of the UK mortgage products have been withdrawn over the last couple of days. This is, by the way, Wednesday. Could be more, could be less by the time we get to Sunday. This does all feel like a story that's unfolding quite quickly, so some of this may well have moved on. But from what I was hearing at places like Skipton, there's sort of nothing under 5%, certainly at the moment. And anyone who now has to refinance could find themselves in a tricky situation.
Well, you've got to think that's a smart move by the banks, isn't it? Because they've obviously just had a rate hike, so you think, okay, they can reset all their products now. They can set the savings rates at X, and they can set the lending products at Y. And, you know, so long as the difference is good enough, that's great. And then all of a sudden they hear that the Bank of England might need to do an emergency rate hike of another 0.5% or potentially more. It does make sense that they would withdraw their products, and at least from a business perspective, that they would withdraw their products just temporarily, just to sort of right that ship. So, Steve, you may not have anything to say about it. I don't know whether you've even heard about it, but I just saw today that one of Labour's policies is to make a great British energy company, which they, I guess they're kind of seeing as an EDF of Britain. Do you see any merit in that?
That's the kind of thing that I need to look at a lot more carefully to know whether I see any merit in it. But, I mean, here's my initial reaction. I think this might be popular, for what it's worth. There's clearly a worry around energy bills. I mean, I'm not a political analyst by any means, and I'm not about to start making pronouncements about what I think is right or wrong or what people should or shouldn't do. But I do think a good part of the Liz Truss election campaign success was we're going to tackle energy bills, basically. I think a popular policy kind of won there in a certain way. And actually, I think quite a few of these policies will be popular. It's just there's so much noise around it that, I say noise, there's so much reaction to it, probably perfectly fair reaction, including from me, not that I'm particularly significant, that this is hugely irresponsible and risky and so on. Once you get past what I think is all the kind of nonsensical political grandstanding, I think it might be a kind of electable thing for Labour, though, and I've never liked Labour's chances better since the Conservatives came to government about 12 years ago, sort of post-last financial crisis, than I do now, with Keir Starmer in charge. And, I mean, it feels very, very Labour. I mean, the Conservatives were, at one point, looking like they were doing quite a bit of spending and borrowing, which is traditionally a kind of politically left sort of thing, rather than taking the sort of small C Conservative route out. Now it looks like Labour needs to do something to differentiate itself, and building your own energy company would be a way of doing it. I have no idea whether I think they have the capacity and the skills to do that particularly, or how it would work, but it's some nice radical thinking, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It does feel to me like it's somewhat politics of today, kind of campaigning on the politics of today, not thinking about the politics of tomorrow kind of thing. But I did see a poll that YouGov released, and YouGov are I think they're quite a conservative outfit. If I seem to remember, the CEO of YouGov is a donor of Tory. So for them to come out with something sort of quasi-positive Labour is interesting. But they ask a question, and they've been asking a question since Starmer came to power, and the question is really simple. Is Keir Starmer a Prime Minister in waiting? So what they mean by that is basically, are they waiting is it just a matter of the general election coming round and Starmer will be Prime Minister? And that has been sort of hovering around about 15 to 20% yes for the last I'd guess for the last 4 years. But over this last period, this end of Boris and this beginning of Liz Truss, that has now gone to just about 50-50. So 50% of voters on YouGov think that Starmer is essentially Prime Minister in waiting. So that is interesting. That was just interesting. Do you have any colour on that, Steve, or did you want to shuffle on? Or
Not much. I mean, here's what I'll say about Keir Starmer without getting into the politics of him and his ideas for the moment. He's my kind of leader, for what it's worth. I find him to be careful, thoughtful, considered, fairly precise with what he says. He's basically everything that I think Boris Johnson is not, who is blustering, who is distracting, who is all these kinds of things. And I kind of like that, which makes me attracted to Keir Starmer as a leader. This was a question about him in particular, rather than kind of Labour policies, although arguably you can't detach the question from of is Keir Starmer a Prime Minister in waiting for him? Does the Labour Party have a hope in hell at the next election, whenever that is? Realistically, those two are closely connected questions. But without taking a view on where we might vote or not vote, or where anyone else should or shouldn't vote, I do like Keir Starmer and his style. I like him more than I liked either Jeremy Corbyn or Ed Miliband beforehand, and I think he looks a lot more credible to me, for what that's worth.
Yeah, I guess he knows how to eat a bacon sandwich as well. That's the key, isn't it? I mean, I've never seen anybody eat a bacon sandwich as weird as Ed Miliband did.
Yeah, he's much more photogenic than Ed Miliband, and I like him quite a bit for what it's worth as a politician. Haven't worked out what I think of Liz Truss, to be honest. I keep hearing that soundbite in my head about cheese from before, where she said it was a disgrace the amount of cheese we imported or something, and that kind of fills me with apathy. But it looks like she's going to do stuff to catch my attention one way or another, mostly by crashing financial markets, from what I can see of it.